Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to another episode of our strategy series. Under the strategy series initiative, we have been covering the syllabus and preparation strategy needed for all GS subjects for your UPSC prelims and mains. So if you haven't seen these videos yet, please go to the description box below and you'll find the master playlist so you can watch all the videos under the strategy series. If you're benefiting from this initiative, do let us know by pressing the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So in this episode, we are going to talk about the preparation strategy needed for covering internal security for your mains. See, internal security is an important subject under GS paper 3 and it is predominantly a mains oriented subject. Under GS paper 3, after economy, after science and technology, disaster management, etc., at the end, you find the syllabus given for internal security. Internal security as a subject deals with the security issues and challenges being faced by India. It primarily covers national security issues. It covers many interesting topics like extremism, terrorism, cybersecurity, border management, etc. This subject is heavily based on current affairs. If you take a look at the previous questions, you will notice that almost every question that has come since 2013, they've all been triggered by current developments. So there is no set pattern to study this subject. It's not that you have a ready material or ready textbook to pick up and read the subject. It's a very dynamic subject, and that's what makes it challenging and as well as interesting at the same time. So let's discuss the best strategy you can adopt to cover this subject so you can score well in internal security. First, let's take a look at the trend of questions that have appeared from internal security in previous papers. If you analyze the papers from 2013, you will notice that consistently UPSC has been asking questions amounting to 50 marks out of the total 250 marks under GS paper 3. In 2013, 5 questions were asked amounting to 50 marks, and from there onwards, 4 questions have consistently appeared, again amounting to 50 marks. So this makes it very clear that you can expect 4 to 5 questions from internal security under GS paper 3. So in any context, you should never be complacent with regard to your preparation for internal security. Because the best part is that if you study well, if you prepare well, it happens to be a relatively easy subject. Once you cover your basic concepts, the background, and once you have a firm hold on current affairs, I'm sure you will be able to answer all the questions that are asked, and with the right amount of practice, you can even score very well in these 4 to 5 questions. So let's begin talking about the syllabus given by UPSC and the preparation strategy that you can adopt. So if you look at GS paper 3, these are the 5 topics that are listed at the end, which constitutes our syllabus for internal security. So there are 5 topics listed over here. So let's break down the syllabus into different parts and we'll discuss them one by one and try to develop an easy structure through which you can prepare for this subject. Instead of just following the structure given by UPSC, we'll take these 5 topics, we'll rearrange them so that we have a better structure and an easier approach to prepare for internal security. Under part A, I would categorize topics number 1, 2, and 4, all of which are related to the larger topic of extremism. If you look at the topics given by UPSC, the first topic deals with linkages between development and spread of extremism. Under this topic, you are basically expected to understand how the lack of development in a particular region, how poor governance and administration in a region can create a fertile ground for the rise of extremism and fundamentalism. On the contrary, if you provide for better development in conflict-hit areas, it can also help in tackling extremism and radicalism. So you need to understand and analyze the linkages between development and spread of extremism. So that is the core focus of this topic. In the second topic, we are expected to study the role of state actors or state agencies and non-state actors in creating security challenges for India. State actors basically refers to government entities, foreign government agencies, particularly intelligence agencies of hostile foreign governments. These hostile intelligence agencies could often make use of non-state actors such as terror outfits, organized criminal organizations, or even media and NGOs to destabilize our country and to create security challenges. This is essentially a secret war or a covert proxy war that hostile countries often wage against their target country. So we need to understand how state actors are using non-state actors as their proxies to wage these covert wars to destabilize their target country. And the fourth topic, as per the syllabus, deals with security challenges and their management in border areas. Basically, it refers to border security and border management. And we should also study the linkages between organized crime and terrorism. Because see, border security is directly linked with the extremist and terrorist threats that we face. Because if border security is not effective, it will enable cross-border crime, especially organized criminal activities like drug trafficking, arms trafficking, etc. And wherever smuggling and trafficking flourishes, you will find that terrorism and insurgency will also flourish. Take, for example, the Golden Crescent region and the Golden Triangle region, which are present right next to India. To the west of India, we have the Golden Crescent that covers the regions of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. This region, called the Golden Crescent, it's a hub of illicit activities, organized criminal activities. Afghanistan, for example, is a global hub for drug production and drug trafficking. Pakistan and its government agencies are closely involved in supporting these organized criminal cartels. So wherever organized crime flourishes, especially drug trafficking and arms trafficking, you will notice that in the same region, money laundering and terror financing will also flourish. So it's very easy in such regions to move around drugs, weapons, and money. And as a result, extremist outfits, such as terrorist and insurgent groups, they will flourish very easily in those areas. We have a similar region to the east of India called the Golden Triangle, which corresponds with Myanmar, Thailand, and Laos. So this is another region where organized crime flourishes. All forms of criminal activities flourish in the Golden Triangle. Along with that, terrorism and insurgency also flourishes in the Golden Triangle region. This in turn has links with Northeast insurgency, which has posed a major security threat for India as well. So these are the linkages that you need to understand, and these are the key chapters that would fall under the broader topic of extremism. So now let's break down these topics into subtopics and simplify the approach and understand what are the key areas that you need to focus on. In order to cover extremism really well, you should always begin by studying the links between development and spread of extremism. As I mentioned earlier, understand how the lack of governance can create a fertile ground for the spread of extremist activities. Take, for example, the Naxal corridor of India. How poor governance, poor development directly contributed to the rise of Naxalist ideology. Understand the impact of various government policies on tribal communities and farmers in the region and how it played a role in the rise of left-wing extremism. You can even focus on the Northeast region and understand how the lack of development contributed to the rise of insurgencies across northeastern states. Then after that, start focusing on left-wing extremism. It's a very, very important topic where you have to specifically focus on Naxalism or Maoism. Under this topic, you will have to focus on the background, the factors which contributed to the rise of Naxalist ideology in India. Also study the principles of Maoism, the core ideology of Maoism. Understand the core differences between left-wing extremist ideology and right-wing extremist ideology. Then focus on the spread of Naxalism in India since 1967. After the Naxal movement started at Naxalbari, how did the movement spread out to different states and what was the impact across India? They also focus on the current situation, the current trends of Naxalism. Is Naxalism on the decline or is Naxal violence going up? And you should also focus on the measures being taken by the government, by the center and the state governments to counter Naxalism. So these are some key areas you have to cover under Maoism or Naxalism in India. Then focus on other conflict zones of India, like Punjab, for example, where we witnessed the Khalistan movement back in 1980s. Identify the root factors which contributed to the rise of Khalistan movement. Understand the core ideology of Khalistan. Then focus on the external support that was available to the Khalistan movement and how Pakistan, especially its intelligence agency, the ISI, played a direct role in sponsoring the Khalistan movement. Understand the role of drugs, Afghan drugs, in triggering the Khalistan movement in Punjab. Also focus on the role of the diaspora community in other countries and how they were backing the Khalistan movement. Understand the overall impact of this violent extremist movement on India's security and focus on India's measures, the measures India took to counter the Khalistan movement. You'll have to focus on the legal measures, focus on the counter-terror measures taken by India, and that will help you cover this topic in complete detail. You'll also have to focus on the recent attempts that are being made to revive the Khalistan movement. So all these issues will have to be covered. Along with the background, you need the recent developments, the current developments as well. After this, focus on insurgency and terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir. Here as well, you first focus on the background, cover the root causes which led to the emergence of an insurgent movement in mid-1980s. Again, study about the role of Pakistan in extending direct support to separatist elements and how Pakistan sponsored terrorism against India. Essentially, you focus on Pakistan's covert proxy war against India, and you study Pakistan's role in state sponsorship of terrorism against India. So this will give you a holistic picture about the threats India has faced with regard to extremism and terrorism, particularly in J&K and as well as in Punjab. You should also understand the linkages that Pakistan created between the Afghan conflict which was going on in 1980s and the conflicts that broke out in Punjab, that is the Khalistan movement, and the insurgency and terrorism scene in J&K. So these broad linkages will also have to be covered so that you develop a comprehensive understanding of the role of these state actors in sponsoring non-state actors against India. Once you cover this, you can focus on the Northeast region, develop a broad understanding of the Northeast and how the region has become vulnerable for various extremist activities. Once you cover the region at large, break down the topic and take a look at each state and understand the root causes and the root factors which have contributed to different insurgencies in different states. Because the root causes for Naga insurgency is different from the root causes for insurgency in other states like Mizoram, Manipur, Tripura and Assam. So focus on each state, focus on each major insurgent movement like Naga insurgency, Mizo insurgency, the insurgency in Assam led by groups like Ulfa, the Bodo insurgency. So these are some key topics you'll have to understand and focus on India's measures, the countermeasures taken by India to tackle the threat of Northeast insurgency. This is where you study the cross-border linkages as well. You should understand the support that Northeast insurgents have received from across the border, especially from Bangladesh and Myanmar. So this will give you a complete idea about Northeast insurgency. Focus on the recent developments, the current trends of Northeast insurgency. So once you cover this, automatically you will have a solid understanding of the connections between organized crime and terror financing. Because these topics they're all interlinked, they're all interconnected. It will also give you a perspective on border security, the impact of cross-border infiltration on our national security. Because be it in Jammu and Kashmir, be it in northeast of India, cross-border infiltration plays a big role in aggravating terrorist threat against India. So border security, border management has to be very effective to curb all these threats, including the threat of terrorism and as well as the threats posed by organized criminal activities. So when you study border security, please ensure that you focus on all the borders of India, the land borders of India that we share with various countries and as well as the maritime borders. Become familiar with the geography of these borders, the challenges present and the security threats that we perceive from across the border. So this will help you comprehensively cover part A of our syllabus and you'll be fully prepared for any question on the topic of extremism. Now let me just show you a few questions that have come in previous papers so that you are fully convinced about this structure and approach. This question dealt with the lack of development and how it drives extremism, especially in the Naxal corridor. The question was focusing on how issues like displacement leads to an impact on the tribal community and how this drives recruitment for left-wing extremist groups like the Naxals. It focused on Naxal hit areas like Malkangiri and it was asking you to discuss the strategies needed to fight against left-wing extremism. Essentially the measures adopted by the government to combat left-wing extremism. So to answer such questions, you need a little bit of background, you need to get your concepts right, but more importantly, you have to be well versed with current affairs. So you should know the linkages between development and extremism, and you should be able to analyze how the lack of development in the Naxal areas has directly contributed to the rise of Naxalism. Then finally, you have to focus on the strategies of the government, the countermeasures taken to improve governance and also to fight back against these Naxal outfits. So it's a mix of your static knowledge, your conceptual understanding of the topic, along with a blend of current affairs, which will help you write good answers to these questions. Look at another question from 2017. This question dealt with insurgency in northeast of India, how the region at large has been affected by multiple insurgent movements. You had to analyze the reasons for the survival of armed insurgency for such a long period in northeast of India. Again, to answer this question, you need your background, you need your static knowledge, along with current affairs, along with the current situation in the northeast of India. Let me show you two more questions here. There was a question in 2016 focused on terrorism, how terrorism has become a competitive industry over the years. This question was directly inspired by the competition between major global terror groups like Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, where they fight for dominance in order to corner the donations they get, the influence they get, so that they can become the major terrorist organizations of the world to drive up recruitment to their organizations. Both the outfits are primarily inspired by radical ideology, but they do compete against each other to gain more appeal and more influence to drive up recruitment and donations, which improves their or increases their prominence as far as geopolitics is concerned. We also had a question on cross-border infiltration and cross-border movement, the threat of criminal activities along the border, especially along India-Myanmar border, and how this directly fuels insurgency in northeast of India. So as you can see, all these questions are based on what we discussed under the syllabus. It's all based on current affairs and your ability to link these topics with the background. So based on that, if you're able to analyze and provide the right and effective answer, you will be able to score well in these questions. So how do you prepare for this topic then? What is the best source you can refer to cover the topics under extremism? We listed out the topics, but to cover them, you need a certain source. For the background, you can rely on any standard book that might be available, or you can even rely on your online research. You need not go too much in depth here, just the basic background is more than sufficient. But the primary focus of your preparation has to be current affairs. I would suggest that you maintain separate notes for all the key topics that I had listed earlier, and by reading newspapers regularly, either the Hindu or the Indian Express, you can cover all these topics. All the topics that we mentioned, they are frequently in news, either in the Hindu or even in the Indian Express. So identify these editorials, these columns, which provide for such analysis and such key facts, and start adding them to your notes under each topic. You have to make concise notes from your newspapers for each and every topic that we had mentioned. Apart from newspapers, you have to rely on few websites where you can get authentic official information. For example, visit the website of Ministry of Home Affairs. It will give you a picture about India's internal security situation with regard to Naxalism, cybersecurity threats, etc. Then you can also rely on the websites of think tanks, popular think tanks like Observer Research Foundation or ORF, and as well as IDSA or the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. You can even follow the website of UNODC, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, in order to gain a better understanding of organized criminal activities and their linkages with terrorism. So by visiting these websites every now and then, and by making brief notes, and by compiling these notes along with your newspaper notes, you will have ready material for all the topics that we discussed. Combine this with a little bit of your static knowledge and background, and your preparation for extremism is covered. So now, let's take a look at Part B. Part B would deal with emerging threats and hybrid threats. This essentially covers topic number 3 that was given by UPSC under the syllabus. It deals with challenges to India's internal security created through communication networks, the role of media and social media in creating security challenges, and the basics of cybersecurity, and as well as money laundering and its prevention. So essentially, under Part B, we have 3 distinct topics. These are areas that represent emerging and hybrid threats for the national security of any country. So first, focus on the communication networks and how their misuse can create security challenges. Understand the role of media, that is traditional media like print media, television, radio, etc., how they can be misused for creating security threats. Then focus on new forms of media that are based on the internet, particularly social media platforms, and how their misuse creates real-world security challenges. This is where you have to understand the threats posed by fake news, propaganda, misinformation, etc. These campaigns, these targeted campaigns on social media can instigate riots, it can breed radicalism, it can trigger civil wars, it can disrupt elections, and it can even lead to rebellions against elected democratic governments. So all these threats have to be understood that emanate from the misuse of social media, and you have to focus on the regulation of social media. So focus on recent incidents where social media platforms were misused by anti-national elements to create security challenges. Focus on the recent examples. Focus on the regulatory measures being taken by the government of India. Last year, for example, the government has brought out the IT rules to regulate social media and digital media and even over-the-top platforms. So focus on all such legal measures, policy measures being taken in order to deal with this threat. Then you take a look at cybersecurity. It's a very, very important topic. You're expected to understand the basics of cybersecurity, the very basics of cybersecurity and cyber threats. So you need to understand how the cyber domain has today emerged as the 5th dimension of warfare. In the cyberspace, countries are waging cyber espionage campaigns against each other. They're spying on each other. In the cyber domain, countries are waging wars against each other. Even there are terror groups which are capable of carrying out cyber attacks, thus resulting in cyber terrorism. Plus, we have cyber criminals, organized criminal groups carrying out cyber attacks, stealing identity, stealing data, and also posing a threat to your financial security. So this brings us to the topic of data security and data protection as well. So all these key areas will have to be covered under cyber security. So what you can do is focus on basics of cyber threats. Understand the different types of malwares that are present. For example, understand what is a virus, what is a worm, what is a Trojan. Understand what do you mean by ransomware attacks, which are frequently in news. So focus on the real world threats that exist. Understand the technical concepts behind it, just the basics, the basic details are more than enough. And focus on data security and data protection. Along with that, you need to study the cyber security architecture that is being put in place by India to protect and defend India's cyberspace. Read about the institutions India has set up, like CERT-In, the National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center, the Defense Cyber Agency. So these are India's key cybersecurity institutions. So read about them and also study the National Cybersecurity Policy of India. So this would help you cover this topic comprehensively. You can also focus on recent examples of cyber espionage and cyber warfare, incidents involving China, US, and other global powers. So you cover this topic comprehensively and you can be guaranteed at least one question for sure, because it's a trending topic. It happens to be an emerging threat and a hybrid threat. Then focus on money laundering. How money laundering is not just an economic threat but also a security threat. Because money laundering, which is the act of converting black money into legal wealth, it is closely linked with organized criminal activities and terror financing. There is a direct connection between criminal activities like drug trafficking, arms trafficking, etc. with money laundering. And this in turn is linked with financing of terrorism. So focus on this topic, understand the linkages, and take a look at the global standards that are present to combat money laundering. Read about organizations like FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. What measures are being taken by FATF to combat money laundering and to counter terrorist financing. Read about the measures taken by India to implement the FATF standards, to apply the global standards in India. Read about the legislative framework we have, which is the PMLA, or the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. Read about institutions like Enforcement Directorate, which has been mandated to enforce the PMLA. So these are the basic topics you need to cover, and all these topics are in current affairs. Even if you don't focus much on the static part, just reading newspapers regularly, identifying these topics and making notes on them is more than sufficient to cover this particular part in complete detail. Just to give you more confidence, let me show you some questions that have come from these topics. There was a question in 2018 based on data security and data protection. Because that year, India had constituted a committee, the Justice B.N. Sri Krishna Committee, to suggest recommendations for a data protection law. Right? This topic is recently in news as well. Based on these recommendations, India had introduced a bill in the parliament. Recently, the bill has been withdrawn by the government as well. So it's important to focus on such key issues like data protection, data privacy. What is the law that we have to deal with cyber crimes such as the IT Act? It's important to understand the legal framework, the policy framework that we have to deal with these security threats. So based on that, we have seen a number of questions appearing in mains. Then recently in 2021, we had this question on cross-border cyber attacks, how it threatens India's security, and what measures can India take to counter these sophisticated attacks. Again, a very generic question. If you're aware of all the current developments and the basics of cybersecurity, you will be able to answer this question. Look at this question from 2013. It was a direct question on money laundering. Basically, what was asked is the basic definition of money laundering and how it threatens our economic sovereignty and national security, and what measures need to be taken to counter the threat created by money laundering. So all these are simple, straightforward questions based on recent developments. So you just need to know the basics and be thorough with recent developments. So let's see what sources you need to prepare for part B so that you can comprehensively cover emerging threats and hybrid threats. Again, the primary source would be current affairs, that is through your newspapers. You make notes from key articles that are linked with the topics that we discussed. Focus on important websites like the website of the MHA, think tanks like IDSA and ORF, and also visit the websites of CERT-In, which is the nodal agency in India for protecting India's cyberspace. Visit the website of FATF to learn more about money laundering and terror financing. Then for the background, if you need a little more additional information for the static part, again you can refer to any standard textbook that's available. But don't give too much priority for the background, the static material. Focus more on the dynamic component, that is current affairs, because in newspapers, the in-depth articles, the editorials, columns, they cover the static part as well. They cover the background as well. So the book is only for your reference reading, for your additional reading. Even if you rely entirely on current affairs, and if you regularly make notes and link them with the topics, it is more than sufficient to cover this subject. Now let me take you to the last part of the syllabus, that is part C, which essentially covers topic number 5 given by UPSC, and it deals with various security forces and agencies of India and their mandate. So under this topic, we are expected to study the different security forces and security agencies of India, understand the mandate of these institutions, understand their objectives, their functions, and we should also focus on any issues that are affecting their functioning. So that is what we are expected to cover under this part. This happens to be a very static area, because if you're just reading about security forces, their mandate, it is a very static part of the syllabus. But to ensure that you prepare thoroughly for this part as well, you have to focus on current affairs, focus on any recent developments involving India's security forces and agencies, and especially give priority for issues concerning these security agencies. So to prepare for this part, what you can do is, you can break down the security forces into different categories. So if you look at this chart, I have divided the security forces and agencies of India into different categories so that you have a better structure, a simplified approach to cover this topic. First, you can focus on the key armed forces of India, that is the Indian Army, Navy, Air Force, and the Coast Guard. Here, just learn the basics, especially recent reforms, defense modernization. For example, the creation of the post of CDS or Chief of Defense Staff, the establishment of new agencies like Defense Cyber Agency, Defense Space Agency, etc. Also focus on defense indigenization, on the key weapon platforms of India. That is more than sufficient. You need not look at the static part related to the Army, Air Force and Navy. There is no reason for you to study the structure of the army, the ranks. Those static areas are not needed. Just focus on defense reforms, defense modernization, and the recent steps that are taken to improve India's military preparedness. From a prelims point of view, you might be expected to know about India's weapon capabilities, but from a mains point of view, defense reforms, defense modernization is more important. Then read about the special forces of the armed forces, like the para commandos, the Marcos, the Garud, Special Frontier Force, etc. So this covers our armed forces. Then you can focus on our intelligence agencies like IB, that is Intelligence Bureau, RAW, Directorate of Revenue Intelligence, etc. Then focus on the investigative agencies and law enforcement agencies. The central law enforcement agencies such as NIA, which primarily deals with counterterrorism, the CBI, Enforcement Directorate, Narcotics Control Bureau, etc. And finally, you focus on the paramilitary forces or the Central Armed Police Forces under the Ministry of Home Affairs. This is where you study about border guarding forces like BSF, SSB, ITBP, etc. and you also focus on other CAPFs like CISF, CRPF, the NSG, the National Security Guards, and the others. So with this approach, you can comprehensively cover the key security forces of India, along with their mandate, along with their objectives, and as well as the key issues that are affecting their functioning. For example, let's say CBI is in news. There are a lot of controversies surrounding the functioning of CBI, the lack of autonomy for CBI. So focus on that topic. There will be sufficient articles in newspaper, that is more than enough. If you look at NIA, the National Investigation Agency, recently NIA Act was amended. So such recent amendments become important. Enforcement Directorate has been in news due to a number of raids it has been conducting around the country. The ED is also in news because it enjoys tremendous powers under Prevention of Money Laundering Act. So focus on such recent issues and controversies. That is more than sufficient to cover this particular topic, because we haven't got many questions from this part. If you look at the previous papers, we just had one question in 2019 that was related to NIA. The NIA Act was amended in 2019. Through this amendment, the jurisdiction of NIA was increased. It was given foreign jurisdiction as well. So because of that recent development, there was a question asked on the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which was also amended in the same year, which is our primary legal weapon against terrorism. And the question also dealt with the amendment carried out to the NIA Act. So you were expected to analyze the consequences of these amendments. So if you're thorough with current affairs, there's no reason why you won't be able to answer this question. So all you need is the right structure, the right approach, where you identify the key topics. So the purpose of this session was to help you identify those subtopics. So when you're reading newspapers next time, you can identify the development and link them with the topic. And once you make notes and revise, your preparation for internal security is done. So the sources for the last part is also exactly the same. You don't need to rely heavily on any book. It's only needed for your static knowledge, for your background. Even if you don't do this, it's absolutely fine, because current affairs will help you cover all the key topics. Focus on your newspapers, visit the official websites, especially the websites of the security forces and agencies. So make basic notes from there, and this is more than enough, because the editorials and columns will provide you the required analysis. So this, in short, is the strategy you need to prepare for internal security for your mains. I hope the session has been useful. If you benefited from the session, do let me know by liking the video, share your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.